Today, obviously, we're talking about finding opportunities in the crisis, specifically COVID-19. So obviously, this has been a huge disruptor for everybody. I don't know anyone that this hasn't affected. So what we're going to do today is highlight ways to look at issues like this and any issues you may be facing as a business or as an organization, and some tools that you can use to essentially find opportunities and innovate in those situations. So, jumping ahead, right. So we are from a company called Identic Group. We're working with the guys over at Winning Moves. And what we do is we're basically an innovation consultancy. So we work with companies, helping them discover opportunities and innovate what they do. And we do this through what we call the 3Ds. So the 3Ds are our core principles for identifying opportunities. And those are be disruptive, embrace digital, differently. So we're going to go through those in a little bit more detail as we get further into the slides. But these are essentially like the kind of core takeaways that we'd like you to leave this presentation with. So before we get started, what we want to do is just do a quick Q&A, just to get an idea of kind of where people are at. So I think should be at the bottom or the top of your screen. You should see a Q&A button. So if you click this, basically you can answer some of these questions. So the first one is specifically talking about working at home and collaboration tools, and what tools you're used to and what you use. So if you go through some of those questions and answer them, it'll give us a good idea of kind of where people are at before we get further into the presentation. I should be able to see the answers as you put them in, so I'll go through the slides as we go through the questions. Fred, are you able to see that poll come up?
Yeah, I'm answering it now, but some of the questions to me are, it depends on how big. So for example, I don't use Snapchat, so I can't answer that one. But when addressing a problem, do you typically, well, you always start with trying to resolve yourself, depending on how big the problem is. When you're talking about the pandemic, then the whole team have been assembled. So, and then the next one, because of where I'm from, half of the business is running and half of the business isn't. So the deep is completely closed.
Yeah.
And in major shutdown, but the business centre, obviously we're keeping the business centre running for the tenants. So I can't even answer that one. Really.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, with the
we are using it to upskill and research for those staff that we can, but because so many are furloughed, you can't do anything. So I'm sorry, this is me. I do tend to read into the detail, and I'm trying to give you the right answers.
That's right. I mean, if we go through those questions that you mentioned, so when addressing a problem, so the slide that we're on now, I'll give you the one you can do, definitely. Would your first step usually be to try and resolve that yourself? That would be the first step that you would go to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's finding out kind of how people would look at that sort of initially. So for me, when I'm looking at something, the first thing I want to do is find out if anyone else has had the same issue, depending on what the problem is. So I may have gone with do a Google search, and that may be more relevant to me. I want to know what the issue is and get the information behind it. So I think it's really like, what is your first port of call? Which of those sort of answers would be the first thing that you would try to do? And I think for a lot of people, you're right, they may try to resolve it themselves, but it depends on that person's confidence in solving that problem. A lot of people may go straight to a colleague and ask them to solve the problem. So it just gives us an idea of kind of where you would where your first port of call would be for finding a solution. And the other question that you was talking about was, what was the other question that you said that you was having trouble with, Freya?
Well, I was going to say, apart from the fact I don't use Snapchat, and I'm not sure that we use it as an organisation particularly. We use a lot of them, so
that's okay. I mean, with that question,
I couldn't have answered it because it wouldn't let me submit my answers unless I put something in everything. So,
yeah. So with the Snapchat question, what we're trying to do is get an understanding of people's knowledge of the technologies behind popular tools. So Snapchat, regardless of whether you use it or not, is based on a particular type of technology. So what we're trying to gauge on this is kind of, what people's understanding are of core technologies. So whether you know what that technology is, or if you're not sure kind of what the technology is that's used for the Snapchat app, or even if you know what the app is itself. I mean, I'm sure there's people that have never used it and I don't actually know what it does. So it's really just a way for us to gauge where people are in terms of their digital maturity.
Yeah, well, I mean, we use loads of different ones. WhatsApp, Zoom, I don't know, Vimeo I've got, depends what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And who I'm talking to.
Right, I can see you've answered those ones anyway now, so that's great. I'll save them and then we can move on. Right, thank you for doing that anyway. So with innovation, basically, we say that there's 3 essentials that you need in order to facilitate innovation. So those are a strong innovation culture, a strategy, and the process in order to facilitate that strategy. So if we break these down, when we talk about strategy, one thing that we tend to look at is what is the purpose of your organization? What is it that you're aiming to do? In a situation like COVID-19 and what we're going through right now, obviously a lot of people have been disrupted and can't operate in the way that they were operating before, and that their core business model is being disrupted. So what we're seeing is a lot of companies look at, okay, well, what is it that we actually aim to do? What is our purpose as a company? And is there another way that we can deliver that or offer that so that we're still fulfilling that promise, that purpose of what we do? So some good examples of this are Dyson are obviously creating the ventilators for the NHS now. So there is actually, I saw something online about this where they were talking about their business model, what they were as a company. And obviously when people think of Dyson, they think of the vacuum cleaners. But they also deliver a lot of other products as well. And they were saying, well, if we look at what we do as we are a technology provider, we provide technology that helps people improve their life or improve their daily lives, then what can we do to fulfill that promise? So, facilitate who we are as a business. So they used the technology that they already had and developed the ventilators that the NHS for the NHS. And another example, you say from the deep, so obviously you're Hull based. So Drive is a taxi company in Hull, which I think most people in Hull are aware of. You see the cars everywhere. And obviously right now they're having issues with that because nobody's leaving the house, so it's very hard for them to facilitate it. But what they did is they looked at their core model and said, well, really we're a transportation company. That's what we do. We transport, we get something from A to B. And they've now released Drive Delivers. So basically what they're doing is you can tell them what shopping you need from local providers. And they're taking that and then they're delivering that to your door by contactless delivery. So they're still fulfilling that promise of what they do, but they've looked at innovating that and looking at how they can change their core model based on the situation. Following on from that, obviously, the process is something that enables you to deliver these things. So when we talk about process, we're talking about how you develop ideas, how you manage the portfolio of ideas you've got, KPIs, and what does success look like for you. So as a business, what is it that you're looking at in terms of success? Is it more people coming to an attraction? Is it more people buying a product? And how are you measuring that? And then project management and how you fund that. So we're going to go through a couple of different tools that will help with some of these, and go into a bit more detail about them later on. And the final thing, and this is the most important when it comes to delivering innovation, is the innovation culture, or just the company culture. So we always say that culture is the cornerstone for successful innovation, because with the best strategy in the world and even the best process, if you don't have a culture where the team feels invested in that, doesn't feel passionate about that, or just isn't that interested, or doesn't understand it, then we tend to find that those projects kind of fall flat before they get too far into them. So this is an image of the Vatican, and we did a project in Rome not too long ago, and if you walk around Rome, you can see that the culture, so the idea of it's a very religious culture, and they've got a lot of history there, is so prevalent in the location. It's formed that location, it's made it what it is, and it's something that you can see everywhere you go. And the same kind of goes for a business or any organization. The culture that you have internally is something that can physically be seen outside most of the time, and will impact how people see what you're doing, and how you can move through those strategies and processes to develop new ideas. So especially in a situation like this, culture is often the deciding factor between success and failure. So we're seeing examples of companies that are obviously being disrupted as everyone else is, but through a good team and through a good company culture, they're able to succeed and find new ways to deliver on their promises as an organization. So this example here is from the world of video gaming, actually. So these two companies are video game developers, and were both very well regarded as sort of one of the top developers around. And there was kind of a battle going on between who was going to top that chart, who was going to take the lead. Now, EA Games on the left were very well known for pushing products out and trying to make as much money as they could. So they often had developers leaving because they were forced to hit certain deadlines, meant they were delivering substandard products, and they were forcing developers to put as many in-app purchases as they could into the games to make as much money. And it became a very public thing, and people started to realize this, which really affected their reputation within the industry. Valve, on the other hand, while trying to sort of win this battle, instead of promoting what they did outwards, they looked at their own company culture, and they basically created a culture of you should only work on projects that you're passionate about. They wanted people to love the art of what they did. They would happily put games back as much as they needed to make sure that the people that were passionate and were working on them were happy with that product going out. So in the by the time that this had sort of come about and they were releasing these games, what happened was there was a huge backlash online against EA Games. So people were online were creating all these images about how EA were trying to steal money from gamers and were creating bad products. Where in comparison to this, Valve created a huge following of gamers. So even though they were releasing much fewer games than EA was, every time they released a game, people were queuing up to buy them, and they had huge support from the community. And if you ever see any kind of online content about Valve games, it tends to be, please release more games, rather than the games you're releasing are terrible. So they were able to completely win out this other company that was much more resourceful than they had. They had much bigger teams, they had a lot more money, because they focused on that culture, and the people that were within that team were the ones that actually pushed it forward. So with that in mind, COVID-19 has created a huge amount of urgency with people. So these things and these topics that we'll talk about, people tend to talk about these over, you know, a year, 2 years, 5 years as a long-term plan. With COVID-19, that's kind of condensed that time frame, and people are now trying to survive, you know, the situation that's going on now. But with the right tools, we've seen people not only survive but thrive and do really well if they're able to adapt and be agile in what they do. So a few of the key disruptors that we've seen, and you'll maybe see more from your own industry, is huge declines in retail and office working. Obviously, the biggest impact is people have a fear of getting ill. So, you know, there isn't footfall, there isn't people leaving the house. People in isolation, it's obviously changing people's habits drastically, especially when we're looking at digital products. We've seen a massive change in people's habits when it comes to digital platforms. And we think that that will carry on after COVID-19 as well. This will potentially create a permanent change, and supply chain interruptions and interruptions to staffing and investment. But that also creates opportunities. So with more people working remotely, this means that there is now more skill sets available online for people to access. So there is more creatives online, there's more freelancers, there's more people that you're able to work with. And hopefully after this, this situation, those people will still be embracing remote working, which creates a much better opportunity for collaboration. The increase in demand for digital products has been huge, massively drastic. I know some people that develop software and games and apps and things, and they are being inundated with people that are looking to digitize what they do, or look at ways to create digital products for their client base. And I think once those products are out, people are using them, that will continue after this pandemic as well. And obviously for businesses, there's a much higher appetite for multiple revenue streams. So if all your revenue comes from one source, so from doing one core business model, this situation has demonstrated how if that is disrupted, that can be a huge issue for any business or organization. So a lot of people that we're speaking to now are looking at how they can create multiple revenue streams, so that they're not so easily disrupted and their business model isn't so fragile. And obviously if you are someone that can help facilitate one of those revenue streams, there is a huge opportunity there. And increase awareness of health. If you are able to offer something that helps people monitor, track, or be more aware of their health or improve their health, whether that be physical or mental, there is huge opportunities in that market right now as well. So going back to the 3Ds, this is kind of how we think that this is the process we use for basically helping people deliver on innovation. So the first D, if we look at be disruptive. So the term disruptive innovation, a lot of people have heard it. It's kind of one of those buzzwords that gets used quite a lot. But it was actually first coined by this guy. So his name is Clayton Christensen. I think I get it wrong every time. So he was writing an article for the Harvard Business Review about failed companies. In particular, he was writing about Kodak. And he was basically talking about how new companies, small companies had emerged and disrupted the marketplace. So he described a disruptor as a small idea, a small company or small concept that slowly gains traction, then moves quicker and quicker to a point where it displaces the people that are at the top of that industry. And we can see lots of examples of similar things. So if you look at Uber, Netflix, Airbnb, Babylon, these are companies that have taken a long existing industry and hugely disrupted it by applying some new thinking. So Uber, obviously the largest taxi company in the world, despite the fact they don't own a single taxi. Netflix obviously digitized the process of renting or watching films, and completely disrupted industries like Blockbuster, which disappeared. And Airbnb have done the same for hotels, and Babylon for health. So what we're seeing now is a huge emergence of companies that are changing the way people think and interact with an industry, and seeing what were giants in that industry be disrupted. So this is a chart from the S&P 500 index, which is an American index of companies. So this on the left, this chart is the lifeline of companies and how long they've lasted, the lifespan, how long they've lasted. And what we can see is it's harder and harder for companies to maintain a long lifespan now because there is so many new and emerging ideas and concepts and companies. So half of the S&P 500 companies that exist now will be replaced over the next 10 years, many by companies that don't exist yet. So some of the companies that we're seeing get displaced, when they came about, the companies that are displacing them didn't even exist. They're less than 10 years old. Companies like Facebook is still actually a fairly new company in terms of what a typical corporate lifespan is, but has obviously completely disrupted industries. And if we look at this, so this is a chart of the top companies in that index. So on the right, we had 2000, and on the left is 2015. And what we can see is huge companies that you would expect to see, General Electric, ExxonMobil, and Pfizer, have not just been disrupted, but actually some of those have dropped off that chart for companies that weren't in existence when that original chart was created. So we've got Alphabet, which is the new Google company, Apple and Microsoft. Companies that don't even create a physical product are completely changing those industries and disrupting legacy companies that have existed for a very long time. So when we talk about embracing digital, we always use the word embrace rather than be digital, because we don't believe that all innovation needs to be digital. But digital does provide a huge catalyst for developing innovation and pushing businesses forward. So when we talk about digital, what we're talking about is the use of physical or virtual technology to aid in a function or operation. And to put that into more context, this is what a typical business may have looked like 10 years ago. A typical successful business, they would need a huge amount of infrastructure, a huge amount of people. There'd be lots of people doing small tasks in order to facilitate what that business does. Nowadays, that same business with that same level of success might just look something like this. So use of digital has made things a lot easier for companies, but also it's increased the risk because there's companies now that can start with nothing more than a laptop and disrupt long-standing businesses in their field. So this example is from Google DeepMind. So Google DeepMind is a machine learning computer, which basically they give it a challenge, they give it a question, and the computer is able to think of solutions to this. So in this example, they basically give it a humanoid figure and asked it what the quickest way was to get from point A to point B. And basically within, I think it was a matter of about 3 to 4 hours, it figured out how to move and how to walk. So this is with no input or no knowledge given by humans. This is just a machine learning the basics of walking, which obviously in comparison, a human would take much longer to learn that skill. So what this is showing is the technology that we're creating today is not just useful as it is right now, but it's helping us develop further solutions and develop on to the next round of technology. Sorry, I skipped right ahead there. There we go, sorry about that. All right, so this chart is from a company called The Emerging Future. So they look at technology and how they think it may impact our lives in the future. So they did some research into how we are using technology to further develop technology. and what they found is that over the course of the next 5 years, they believe that we will be 32 times more advanced in our technological capabilities. And that's due to us using the technology we have now to further develop technology. When they looked at this further into the future and looked over 10 years, they found that that increased to 1,000 times more advanced. And once they got to 20 years, it was 1,000,000 times more advanced. Now, these seems like really dramatic numbers, but if we look at the short turnaround of some of the technology we have now, so even looking at smartphone technology, 10 years ago, what it was capable of compared to how much we use those devices now and what it's capable of, it isn't completely impossible to think that we will see massive increases in technology and our capabilities within it. And obviously for the business, for people in business, this creates more tools for us to use to develop new ideas and improve what we do. And finally, probably the most important of the 3Ds is think differently. So when we're talking about innovation thinking, we tend to categorize businesses into two areas. So the first is people who are playing not to lose. So this tends to be incumbent businesses. And this is businesses that have existed for a long time. They may have shareholders, they have people, they have existing client bases, and people that have to keep happy with their service. So they're innovating normally to try and maintain what they already have. So they have much more restriction, they're not able to take as many risks. And a lot of what they do is based on maintaining the status quo and maintaining where they are within their market. Where the other side of that is what we would call the disruptors. And these are people that are playing to win. And this is something we see a lot with startups and new companies, or companies that maybe have a smaller market share in what they do. They have less to lose, essentially. So that means that they are able to be more flexible. It means that they are able to take much more risk. And these are the people that are causing huge disruption in industries. Now, these ways of thinking are obviously inherent to where you are within your industry. But what we found is that you can adopt both ways of thinking. So if you are an incumbent, that doesn't mean that you can't look at playing to win. But it comes back to developing that culture, developing processes and strategies that allow you to think like this. And this is a quote from someone called Sophie Hatford, who is an editor for Wired magazine. So Wired magazine is a huge magazine in tech and digital, and they promote new ideas and concepts. And during a presentation, she said that legacy companies have too much to gain from the present to think too much about the future. And for us, this is normally one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we see to companies being able to innovate and change what they do. So a good example of this is Kodak. So I mentioned this earlier. Kodak were obviously a huge camera manufacturer, and were known for creating film cameras, so cameras that use these kind of films. And basically they were hugely disrupted because digital cameras became a thing. And people no longer wanted to buy film, people no longer wanted to go through the development process. And that completely destroyed their market share and where they were. But actually, Kodak were the ones that developed the digital camera. So they developed this platform. They thought it was a great idea, but they didn't want to disrupt what they did. They thought, well, we are known for creating film. That's what we do. We don't want to change that because that's what people know us for. So they left it there. They stopped doing it. Obviously, eventually other people started looking at this and developed this technology further, and it disrupted what Kodak did. So because they were unwilling to think differently about what they did, they were essentially disrupted by their own innovation. So I think they're a really good example of why, this is what we've always done. It's probably the most dangerous way to look at a business model and what you do. So what we're going to do now is go through how to actually put some of this into practice, how to identify some problems and some tools that you can use to solve those problems. So I will hand over to Rob if he's ready.
Yeah, Jamie, thanks. I think you can see me now, guys. Thanks for that intro, Jamie. All the stuff. We've really talked to you about innovation principles and some principles around disruption and innovation, and really that's a general thing. But obviously, what's happened recently has thrown that into sharp relief, because we are all being forced to effectively think of disruptive ways of doing things because of the situation that exists now. It's actually a classic scenario. So industry often reacts to situations. So it could be an economic crash, it could be regulations changing. So businesses are constantly adapting to things like this. Arguably, things as large as COVID and a global pandemic don't come across that very often. But what we're trying to say is to set this up as an opportunity rather than a complete disaster, which obviously is a disaster. But we're trying to now give you some tools to find your way through it. So first thing is we're going to talk about how you identify a problem. Jamie, I think, can I flip through the slides now? I'm not sure if I've got control. Would you mind just flipping over to the next slide? And just flip over to the next slide again, please. I'll come back to that one. Sorry, guys, there's one I wanted to talk about first. So for any innovation, you need to identify what the problem is. And here's a very famous quote from a very famous man who said, if he had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and just 5 minutes thinking about the solution. And what he's effectively saying is, when you understand the problem, you can come to the right solution. And actually, if you do the work properly and you understand the problem in depth, then actually the solution becomes very, very obvious. And I'll take you through some examples of that in a minute. But this is just trying to stress the whole issue is understanding the problem. At the moment, we have a problem because of COVID. But that COVID is causing some very specific problems in your businesses, and you need to get to the root cause of what those problems are to really be able to address them. And I'm going to give you some tools to do that now. Just flip back, please, Jamie. Sorry, one tool that we use is called the fishbone diagram. So with the fishbone diagram, what you must do is effectively write down the problem statement. So get a group of guys from your business together and write down what the problem is. And you put that at the end, it says effect. Just click up the build, please, Jamie, to the next, click forward. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, at one end, you work out what the problem is. So in this case, we're talking about customers' orders keep arriving late. And then as a team, think of possible reasons for why that might be. And here we've got things like mindset, teams, cost, information, technology, managing, results, communication. There could be anything, but whatever is applicable to your problem. And then what you must do with each of those problem areas is find out what the root cause of the problem is. So for example, with technology, it says orders aren't automated for delivery systems. So that's the cause, but we need to understand why are orders not automated for delivery systems. And by doing that, you'll work to the left of the diagram, which is fundamentally the lost cause. So the root cause, rather. Let me take you through that in a second. Just flip through past 2 slides, please, Jamie. We can do that, getting to the root cause, by a tool we call the 5 whys. So the 5 whys is really asking a question repeatedly, the question being why. And what is important to do is to ask yourself that more than one time, because if you just ask yourself why and come up with an answer, a single answer, that's probably a very superficial level of assessment of the problem. If you keep asking why, you will get down to the deep cause of that problem and effectively the root cause. So the way we would do this is you get a group of people together, agree on the problem statement, as we said before, write that at the head of the fishbone, identify the subcategories, and for each of those subcategories, ask the group why, and ask why again, until you feel that you've really got to the bottom of the problem and identified the root cause. And usually you should be able to do that with 5 whys. So if you only ask yourself 1 or 2 whys, you're probably not going deep enough. There may be some problems that require more than 5, but bear with me. I'm sure you could probably think of some things that maybe need more, but usually 5 whys will suffice. You just click to the next slide, please, Jamie. So if we take a very simple everyday problem, like our car won't start, so that's the problem. So we ask ourselves why. The first why is the car won't start because the battery's flat. Why is that? The battery is flat because the alternator is broken. Why is the alternator broken? The answer to that is the car hasn't been serviced. So we're starting to get closer to the root of the problem here now. If we just simply replace the alternator, then if the car's not being serviced regularly, the alternator is going to break again, and we're not addressing the root cause. So we know that the car's not being serviced, but why is that? The reason why the car's not been serviced is because I always forget to book it in. Okay, so we're starting to get much closer to the real root cause here now. So why do you also forget to book it in? And the reason for that is I never know when the service is due. Here, we feel we're at the root cause of this. The real reason why this guy's car won't start is because he's not servicing it. And the reason why he's not servicing it is because he doesn't know when the service is due. So once you get to that level of the problem, you can actually solve that. So he could perhaps write in his iPhone or his calendar just a week before to book a service every year. You know, that's the kind of the problem solved. Or you could do that in a more interesting way with some form of technology. But if we just look at some of the higher level, the higher answers to why, like the alternator is broken, that's not addressing the root cause. Even the car hasn't been serviced isn't really addressing the root cause, because it's not the fact the car hasn't been serviced, it's the fact that the person who's needs to arrange that is not remembering to do so. So you can see in this trivial example of why this guy's car won't start. It's basically because he's not servicing it regularly because he doesn't remember to do so. So if you click onto the next slide, Jamie, we can explore that a little bit. So what you need to do, as we said before, is for each of these subsets, go through the 5 why question. In this case, let's talk about technology. So one of the problems we felt was that orders, the main problem is that customers' orders keep arriving late. So when we look at technology, the reason for that in the technology section is that orders aren't automated with delivery systems. So why is that? If you just click build, please, Jamie. The reason why the orders aren't automated is because the senior management team were invested in an integrated system. Why is that? The outlay would affect this year's profit margin. Okay, so why is that? One of our top line KPIs is so that we have to improve net profit. Why is that? Basically, it's the leaders looking for an exit. So fundamentally, this business isn't existing in a system which would make sure that its orders arrived on time because they haven't invested in the technology, and they're looking at the very top line level of increasing profit. And the reason why increasing profit is important is because the leader's looking to exit. So he's looking to exit with his share options or selling the business. So fundamentally, they need to address the leadership issue here, not just any of the closer why answers. So you can see in this case, if you do this with a number of problems in the subsectors, you get to identify a number of root causes for why your problem is why your problem's occurring, and then therefore get to the root cause. So it's really important to address the root cause. So we suggest that you use a tool like that. You obviously know your businesses very, very well. You can build that diagram and look at the problems your business faces and effectively answer what the root cause is in those sections. So we're just going to talk about agile and waterfall management. If you click to the next slide, please, Jamie. I mean, fundamentally, this is how to run projects and effectively deliver solutions in a more agile manner. So the classic approach of project management is called waterfall management, where one task in a plan leads to the other. They're all interlinked. You do task A, you do task B, you do task C, and you effectively deliver the project in that way. So it gets you from A to B by basically planning a project, creating the solution to that project, testing the solution, and then effectively launching it. But what happens in real life is that plan never plans out as you expect. Certainly doesn't in very complex projects. You learn lots as you go along on a project, and that will derail you on your journey from A to B. And if you adopt a waterfall management process, then effectively your projects die because you get to testing and it doesn't work, so you don't launch it. And it takes a long time to get from A to B because you're doing it in a sequential manner. So what would be a better way of approaching project management would be agile management. And agile management differs in its approach from getting from A to B because it breaks down the project into simpler tasks. So effectively, you take steps from moving from A to B, and in each of those steps, you create an agile approach. So you go through the same steps as you would in a waterfall management system, but you effectively learn as you go along. So in this case, from left to right, you get to the first flag, by effectively doing what you would have done in a waterfall project, but doing it in a shorter period of time. So you plan an approach, you create a solution to that approach, you test it and you launch. You'll learn something. If it failed, you may go back and test in a different way or create a different solution. But that may take you down a different route. But that route is informed by learning, because you're breaking down the task, the overall project, into a number of tasks. So in each series of these cycles, test cycles, you're basically learning and progressing to the solution, which is B. But rather than taking a waterfall management where there's only one way to get from A to B, in an agile approach, because you're learning, you're effectively getting smarter and arriving at a better solution by the time you get to B by adopting this approach. Okay, if you click to the next slide, please, Jamie. So we've talked about how you identify the problem. We've talked about approaches to managing a project. Now we're going to give you a process for actually delivering a solution. So you've probably heard of innovation sprints. It's the current vernacular for talking about innovation processes, and it was actually made famous by Google. And if you go online and Google innovation sprints, you'll come up with a process very similar to this. It's basically a 5-step process for doing a project. Effectively, anyone who's been innovating for the last decade or 50 years is probably using a very similar process. But we're going to teach you this process because we think it's a good way of getting a very strong solution and an efficient way to deliver a project. So firstly, step 1 is a download. So this is very similar to the root cause analysis and the fishbone diagram and the 5 whys. But fundamentally, to start a project, you need to get, you start basically with a problem. So that comes from your 5 whys and your root cause analysis. Now we need to start to deliver that into a project. So our first step is to hold a download session. And fundamentally, you would get a group of your colleagues, perhaps invite some external people, some consultants, or key opinion leaders in whichever area it is you operate in. And you would basically start the project with all of those guys sharing their information. So in other words, everyone in that project team is downloaded the information which gets them to the same page. So for example, if you were going to talk about sustainable packaging, and you are a drinks manufacturer who currently sells products in glass bottles, you might get your colleagues, your production colleagues, your R&D colleagues, your marketing colleagues together. You might bring in a sustainability expert. You might look at some of the trends that are happening in other industries. How are they solving sustainability with different business models? You might look at materials. But basically, you'd want to share all of that information to create that download material. And basically, once you have all of that material, that becomes the raw material to basically find some solutions. Just a quick note on the download section. If you have a very strong innovation culture, and we talked about the importance of culture earlier in the presentation, then you should be constantly creating download material. So you should be constantly creating stimulus for your business. You should be constantly creating insight for your business. And the difference between stimulus and insight is stimulus is basically what are the trends that are happening in the world. So things like there's an aging population, there's a global pandemic, green is a concern, sea levels are rising, etc., etc. They're all macro sort of trends that are happening. There are also technology trends. So Jamie talked about the evolution of technology, and fundamentally technology is going to become faster and faster and faster and faster, and it will be able to solve lots and lots of the problems we have today. But unless we know about what the capability of technology is, then we're not going to be able to deploy it as a business. So we need to be have an organization who is curious and who are going out to learn and understand what technology solutions are available. The other things around stimulus and insight, stimulus is like looking at what your competitors are doing, looking at how regulations are changing. So all of this stuff is giving you like insight and basically opportunities to innovate. The other side of stimulus and insight is insight. Insight really is the absolute key to this. It's about understanding what your consumer or your customer or your clients or your market needs. And basically, whichever business you're in, you should know basically what your customers want. Because if you don't, you're not going to be giving them the right you're not going to be giving them the right solutions. So you have to spend a lot of time with consumers, getting close to consumers and customers, looking at how they buy your product, looking at how they interact with your services, talking to them. You probably are a consumer of your own product to a certain extent, so ask yourself those questions. Fundamentally, if you can get the right insight and match that to the right technology or stimulus, you can come up with a great solution. So Dyson, when they first brought out their DCO on Hoover, it wasn't just about technology. It wasn't just about the dual cycle and technology that they deployed. It was an innovation that was driven, enabled by technology in Hoovers and all the rest of it. But it was actually made an amazing innovation by the insight that they had. So they spent a lot of time talking to consumers and looked at the pain points for vacuum cleaning. And what they worked out was that consumers obviously vacuum their homes, some more often than others, obviously. But the pain points that they found were that a Hoover loses suction, and you never really know whether it's performing at its best, and you never really know when the bag's full, and cleaning the stairs is a real pain. So based on those three insights that they got from talking to consumers, they came up with having a clear drum, which basically allows the user to see when the bag needs emptying effectively. And they took out that pain of emptying the bag, because before it was a very messy operation. They made it very simple and fuss-free and clean. They also provided their very efficient suction with their dual cyclone system, which allowed the Hoover not to lose performance as the bag got fuller, and you were allowed to empty the bag more often. And they also created a system whereby it was easy to clean the stairs with that whole extendable hose thing. So what they were able to do by combining stimulus and insight was come up with a really great innovation, which has been very successful, and it's fundamentally been the cornerstone of their company, which has gone in lots of different directions now, using the same process and looking at what pain points were the products, which is insight, and matching that to technology, which is stimulus. So basically, you need to have in your organizations in place a system where your guys can come and deliver stimulus and insight to the business and collect that constantly, and effectively be able to challenge the business any given time to say, we think we need to be doing this because we know this about our customers and we know this technology can deliver. So that's just a general comment on culture. If you have all of that stuff happening, you've got loads of stimulus and insight material, you can basically harvest that material to create your download. So say for example, I was a pharmaceutical company and I wanted to look at women's health. So we want to do an innovation sprint around women's health. We could basically use all of the stimulus and insight material we've collected that's to do with women's health. So it might be insights around menopause, it might be insights around fertility, it might be consumer insights about what does a woman want to achieve with her life and family and aspirations, etc. If I can basically pull all of that information to conduct an innovation sprint on women's health by basically sharing all of that information to my colleagues who are running through the innovation sprint. And that's the first step, the download. So basically you're getting everyone on the same page. So you're sharing the expertise on the topic, in this case, in my example, women's health. Then you use that download material to ideate. So ideation is just an accepted word for coming up with ideas. So basically you use the group, so you probably work in teams, and you convert that download material into ideas. And at this stage of the innovation sprint, the more the merrier. So the more ideas you have, the better. We shouldn't be too judgmental about them. The more creative we are, the better. Obviously, we have to inject realism into the process, but that comes later. But basically, you need to get your team together to do ideation and come up with a range of solutions to your problem, the root causes that you identified earlier in the process. And there are lots of tools for doing that. You can do something that's very simple as getting a load of Post-it notes and basically getting people to put ideas on Post-it notes and putting them onto a board. Or you can use some tools to think about your business in a different way, to give yourself a different perspective. So for example, well, I know we've got someone from the Deep here. If they had a problem with the Deep, they could think of how a different company would solve that problem. So you might think, how would IKEA solve that problem? So IKEA is a company that's all about functional furniture and delivering a different type of experience when you're shopping for that furniture. So how would they address the problem with the Deep? Or if it was the BBC, how would the BBC address the problem of the business using their values? So the values of the BBC are trust, transparency, voice of reason, voice of authority, etc., independence, etc. So you can basically put yourselves into different perspectives and come up with ideas for your problem. So there are hundreds of tools for ideation, but doing good ideation is all about getting a large number of harvesting ideas from the team who's in the room. So once you've got a group of ideas, you may have 100, you may have 10, you may have 5. But the next thing is something that very few people do when they're innovating, is employ a very good selection process. So often you've created a load of ideas, you now need to select which ideas you're going to take forward. Now, often, as a bad example, companies often do this just by the guy who earns the most money, or the boss effectively chooses the ideas. So you might have 30 people in the room. The marketing director who effectively leads that team will be the guy who chooses which idea we progress, or the MD says, my wife likes green, so it needs to be green. That is a really bad example of selection, but that is how it tends to happen in a lot of cases. But really, to do selection properly, you need to come up with some way of choosing the right concepts to progress and move to the next stages. And that can be done using a selection matrix tool. So basically, you think of 3 or 5 measures that are key to this, key to the success of the problem. So it could be cost, it could be time to deliver, it could be chance of success, it could be deployability, it could be which markets can we launch this in. It could be lots of different things. But choose like 3 or 5 of those and effectively score each of the ideas on that matrix. So you create a table with those 3 or 5 parameters in it, and you score them. You can either score them 1 to 10, or just score them high, medium, and low, or just score them 1, 3, or 5, or something like that. But just do it in a simple way. And then you basically go through each idea and score them. And then it becomes very, very clear which is the best idea, because it's the one that scored the highest. And by doing a process like that, you're taking out subjectivity, you're applying a rational process to it, which basically takes out the rank in the room, or any vested interests, or people defending their area of the business from any risk. And you're also taking bias out. And it gives you a more robust way of taking the idea forward. The other benefit of it is it kind of makes sure that you're progressing ideas which are going to have a good chance of progressing and actually making it to market. Other ways of doing it a little bit more simply than creating a selection matrix, I'll just give everyone a vote. You know, get a load of post-it stickers, dots, or give everyone a marker pen and give them 5 votes, and just go around the room and tick the ideas that they like, or apply a sticky to the ideas that they like. And there you can very, very quickly find where the consensus in the room is. It's not sophisticated as the other method, and it does suffer a little bit from bias, because generally what happens is people tend to follow what other people have done. So I would definitely recommend doing it in a lot more robust way by creating a selection matrix with relevant parameters to the solution in the business. You'll get a better solution that way. So once we've selected our idea, and actually you may have 4 or 5 ideas that score quite highly, but depending on how many you've got the resource to deliver, or depending on how feasible you think they are, choose one, and your other ideas might become a pipeline for things you do in the future. But you're basically going to take an idea forward. So to take an idea forward, you need to prototype it. So prototyping is all about creating a bare but usable idea, a demo of the idea, sufficient to basically convey what the idea is to an audience. Okay, so we think about prototyping as modeling or building things, and famously when Google invented Google Glass, which was the first iteration of a smart pair of glasses, they basically did that by taking a pair of normal glasses and sticking a load of batteries on it and lenses on it. It looked ridiculous, and it was obviously not usable or marketable, but what it did is it allowed them to create the sort of usability and experience of what that product could deliver when they were taking it to their management team to get the buy-in or not. Now, obviously, Google Glass isn't an amazing example because it didn't end up being particularly commercially successful, but we're now seeing very much more elegant versions of smart glasses that can create AR fields and interact with digital technology coming onto the market now. So Google are actually a little bit ahead of the time there, and probably commercialized that before they were able to develop a product which was really consumer usable. But fundamentally, the idea is you create a version of the product that allows you to test it. So prototyping, as I just described it, there was creating a model. Obviously, building a smart glasses or a digital water bottle or a brand new manufacturing plant is actually a lot of effort to prototype. You don't have to physically build something. Prototyping could be very simple. It could be just taking a flip chart and basically mapping out what is the journey of using this product. So for example, if you're going to come up with an app, you don't have to code the app or even make a PowerPoint click-through version of the app. You can just say what the consumer version is and effectively build a wireframe of it as a diagram. So a consumer logs in, consumers have to enter their weight or whatever it is that's relevant to the app, and you basically demonstrate it in that way. Another good way of doing this is getting some concept artists in the room. So bringing the idea to life with a visual representation of it is really, really powerful. So you can, if you know someone who can draw really well in your organization, great, but you can hire these guys for not a huge amount of money, and it's very much well worth the investment, because they can basically create a visual representation of what your product looks like just on a flip chart. And that's usually enough to show what the prototype might look at this stage of a project. So once we've got that bare idea that demos what the idea is, we then test it. So classically in organizations, testing might mean doing massive factory trials. It might mean doing a huge 100,000 person market research study, but all of that costs a hell of a lot of money. You can do that in a much more functional and agile way by creating live interactions with your prototype. So basically, testing is creating an interaction with the prototype you've created. So as I said, that could be as simple as a flip chart, which you've drawn out the user journey or a representation of what your idea is, and you create interactions with people that are going to allow you to test whether that's a good idea or not. And generally speaking, the interactions you would want to create would be with users. So for example, users are going to be the people who are going to use your products. So if I sell headache tablets, I could actually test my idea by walking into a pharmacy and talking to the people who are buying paracetamol or ibuprofen tablets for headache, and sharing my idea with them and collecting feedback in that way. I could talk to the pharmacist because he's the person who's sitting behind the counter and effectively recommending my product. So that's a really good example of creating a smart interface with my users. Another way of doing it is using technology. So you could create a WhatsApp group. You know, if you have 5 people on this innovation sprint in your team who are running the sprint, and you combined all of their WhatsApp group, you're probably going to reach about 1,000 people. You could effectively create a WhatsApp group from all of those people, send them electronically the materials that demonstrate your products, and get feedback. So you're basically creating a very quick, on-the-hoof market research for zero investment, as opposed to spending tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds with a classic market research company. So that's one kind of interaction you need to create to test your products with users. Another type of interaction you would need to create would be with internal experts. So you might want to speak to the guys who run your supply organization to make sure that what you're producing can be produced, or understand what would be required to be able to produce this product, what investment would be required. You might want to speak to the internal regulatory experts. So what regulations do I need to conform with to buy this product? Is it feasible? You might want to speak to your legal guys to talk about, can we protect this with IP? Are we infringing any other ideas that sit out there? Are there any other regulations that we're going to fall foul of because we're not aware of the legal ramifications of doing this? So yeah, create those interactions with your internal internal experts, and then finally create some interactions with your stakeholders. So basically your stakeholders are effectively the bosses of the organization. So it might be the marketing director, it might be the managing director, it might be the guy who runs the factory. You need to get their buy-in. So fundamentally, you test the idea in that way. This can be done in days or even hours, not weeks or months, which is the usual way of doing innovation. We call this an innovation sprint because the idea is it's a race. You're effectively trying to get your idea from idea to testing its feasibility in the shortest possible time, and be as imaginative and as creative and as agile as you possibly can to do that process in the best way. And I hope you got that from the very quick journey that I've just described. But fundamentally, going from download to test and success doesn't always work out quite the way you manage it. So if your test fails for any reason, well, if it passes, fine. Progress the project, launch the project, and off you go. It's a live project in your business, and you launch it and make some money from it. But actually, if it fails, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to kill it. Because actually, if the test fails, you probably had some feedback, which means you need to go back and change things. So actually, you can go back to any step, 2, 3, or 4, or even 1, and address some of the comments you've heard. So, for example, if in your test the consumer said the battery life's not long enough, then you go back to your prototype and change the prototype so the battery life lasts the longest, the required amount of time, or change the color. Or actually, if they didn't like it, but actually you selected the wrong idea, and you knew that from your ideation you had a different idea that was closer to some of the feedback you'd had, you go back and select another idea. Or actually, if there's nothing that's good and you need to change things, go back to the ideation stage. So in other words, this is an agile process. It's not just going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. It's going from 1 to 5 and potentially moving back to 2, 3, or 4 at any time. There is obviously a point where you have to kill a project. You don't just keep going through this process until you're flogging a dead horse. You do it sensibly, but you don't. You basically do this with the experience of learning. So failing in the test, it should be okay to fail in any organisation, so long as you learn from that failure. And if you've done the test in the right way, you will learn a lot, because you will learn why that product has failed, which gives you the opportunity to then go back in and address it. So again, another platitude around innovation is it's okay to fail, or fail fast, fail often. That's actually absolutely true. It's absolutely okay to fail. And arguably, if you're not failing, your organisation isn't being innovative enough, because if you are being innovative, you will fail from time to time. And it's okay to fail if you learn from that failure. If you've learned something from that experience that makes you stronger, more resilient, or more importantly, learn how to provide better solutions, then that's why failure is important. So going from 1 to 5, failing's fine. We can go back and adjust the model and address those issues and get to the right solution. But this really goes back to one of the things that Jamie was mentioning before. It's all about the culture of your organisation. To be able to fail, you need to have a culture in your organisation which allows people in that organisation to feel like they're allowed to fail. Because generally speaking, in a corporate environment, the guys who get promoted and pay rises and high bonuses are the guys that have success, are the guys that generate money, and that's usually not associated with failure. So generally speaking, most corporate environments are not particularly receptive to failure. But if you want to work in a corporation which is great, and a corporation which is going to be innovative, you need to embrace failure and empower your guys to feel safe and to feel like they can fail. So in this process, I should contribute stimulus, and I should feel able to contribute stimulus and insight, which is off the wall. So I should be able to provoke my business. I should be able to spell out disaster scenarios and provoke my business to thinking about those scenarios. So for example, if you'd have been in your business last year and saying, well, what happens if there's a global pandemic in quarter 1 of 2020, and it means no one can come to work, or no one's going to be buying our products, you would have probably been laughed out of the room. But obviously, and this is an exceptional example, of course, but that has actually been proven to be something that's come to fruition. So in other words, you need to have an organisation which is constantly challenging itself and thinking about these scenarios and empowering your people to be brave enough to think and present these scenarios to the business. And that's going to strengthen the stimulus and insight and the culture in your organisation. And that's going to give you a strong position to be able to run these innovation sprints. So I think this is probably the last slide of this section. Jamie, we just flick forward to just see if I can confirm that. I may have a surprise. Okay, so just to really recap what we've just told you before we talk about some other things. Fundamentally, we've talked about innovation. We've talked about the absolute core of what it is to be successful in innovation. It's about having the right strategy. So where's my organization going? Who do we want to be? It's about having the right process, which is about how are we going to get to there? How are we going to fulfill that strategy? But what sits under that is your culture. So as Jamie said earlier, you can have the best strategy in the world, you have the most amazing processes, but if your people don't employ the right culture, all of that's going to fail. And it really sits with leadership. Leadership needs to be supporting and empowering that culture to basically ensure that you're innovative. And you know, lots of companies are very comfortable making money, and they don't necessarily see the need to innovate. What we've seen with the COVID crisis is actually it's those companies that have been sitting on their laurels and being complacent that are probably the ones that are going to be most disrupted by this, because the ones that have the best culture and are the most innovative are the ones that are going to be the most agile, and they're going to have ways of dealing with this. And fundamentally, and this is probably not how we all feel today, given we're so new into this, but this COVID crisis is creating opportunities for all of our businesses. Jamie mentioned some examples earlier, and some very local examples to this region where they've effectively pivoted their business model. We talked about some more national examples like Dyson, etc. And there are lots of other examples of how people are using their skills to deliver solutions for COVID, because they have a culture which allows them to react to what's happening. And we need to be moving all of our businesses to being agile. I'm going to move on now really to, I think we've got a quick poll. Do we want to take questions now, or do we want to move on to the poll, guys?
Yeah, I think just on a recap of that, Rob. Hi, everybody that's still tuned in. On a recap of that, I think it would be good if anyone's got any questions. I know we've got people tuned in from very different businesses, but just to stress that everything that's been outlined by Rob and Jamie is applicable to whatever sector that you're in. So whether you make a product, if you're a visitor attraction, perhaps you provide a service, you're an accountant, whatever it might be, it's completely the same process throughout. And building on that, you know, whether you employ 200 people or 2 people, you know, the culture of the organization is vital. The other part of finding the root causes, to going through the 5 whys and establishing what is the root cause and why are we in this situation. You know, so if you're a visitor attraction and you can't get people through the door because they can't leave the house, you have to start going back down those 3 or 5 whys. Okay, why is it? In this case, it's a very extreme example, but this could be applied for any number of reasons. After COVID-19 passes, for example, there's an argument to say that if you're an attraction economy or a retailer, people are going to have less spend. They're going to have less money because they've essentially been furloughed for goodness knows how long. And so they might be a little bit more cautious about how often they go out or how they spend the money. So how can you supply what you do, or use the skills of what you do to offer an alternative service that they can access in an easier way, or a more cost-effective way, or whatever that might be. Yeah, and then going through those 5 whys, finding the root cause, and then applying that root cause with some stimulus and insight with all the people around you to run essentially that sprint process that Rob's just been through. And just to stress, Rob did touch upon it there, but that sprint process is, you could be doing that every day technically with your people. I mean, you could be doing that over a lunch hour. You know, while you're at home and everybody's working from home, you could be using a video conference software like this, Zoom or whatever it might be, and actually just testing this, trying some scenarios just to get the juices flowing. You know, give a scenario and do it over a video call like this. Do a little bit of ideation, select some of the ideas that come out of it, and really just go through that cycle of just getting that creativity flowing and establishing a routine of doing it. And if you can get that going on a daily or once a week basis, you know, the big stress is that innovation it typically is kind of done once a year. By, if you take like a big organization, they'll do like once a year, they'll book out a hotel room somewhere in London or something like that, get a few of their stakeholders down, and they'll have an innovation day with some flip charts and stuff, and then it kind of all goes on the shelf. You know, you really have to change that whole mindset and make it like part of your daily role. So as well as the administrative tasks that you're delivering to actually function as a business and keep cash flow going and all that kind of stuff, you also, as part of that function, should be running an innovation creative sprint all the time, to be able to, so that you can continuously be agile and continuously adapt to emerging situations. And the other final stress in that, I would say, is that it makes no difference of what position you're in. Everyone's job is innovation. So, you know, if you're the person that opens up the doors in the morning, or you're the managing director, and everything in between, everyone has got a million ideas. Idenic have run lots and lots of workshops with companies all over the world. And some of the best ideas come from those people that actually usually aren't the ones that are consulted in terms of how do we make this better, because that's not typically within their remit or within their function. But when you start bringing those people together, you'd be very, very surprised what comes out of it. So I would welcome you to just try just a concept of this, even as just a test while you're all in furlough, and set a call up in 10 o'clock in the morning or something with 5 of your staff and say, okay, let's take a problem that we're facing and let's try it and see what it looks like. And you'd be surprised what comes out of it. But yeah, I think it would be a good time just before we go to the next bit, just to ask if there's any feedback or questions on some of the stuff that's come out from there so far. Freya, I think's raised a hand.
Yeah, just a quick question. Rob, can you go back to the slide that you had the fishbone diagram on? Are you able to go backwards to that?
Yeah, well, I'm not, but Jamie is. Very good.
Thank you, Jamie. Right, along the 5 whys, I'm very, very conversant with, and I think my teams are really fed up with hearing me say that when something goes wrong. So, you know, whenever we're doing anything like that, we always revisit that.
Yeah.
But I noticed that on the example that you then went on to do, you just took the bottom line for your 5 whys. You went,
Yes.
you know, customers arriving late, automation and all the rest of it, and you went through that 5 whys. Did you do the same process on the top line?
Yeah, I mean, this is just an example. It's not a real example; it's a made-up example.
No.
You would effectively go through the 5 whys for each of those coloured boxes. So you'd go through mindset, teams, cost, information, etc., and do the 5 whys on each of those. Yeah, so you wouldn't. We just work through one because obviously it gets a bit repetitive.
Yeah, so on the fishbone diagram, do you always only have 2 strands to it, or could you have more strands?
Do you mean from cause to effect?
Yes.
Yeah, effectively, you could have a number of causes leading to your effect that you're observing. So yes, you could. Right.
Okay. I just thought I'd double check that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think the 5 whys. I mean, the whole point of it really is saying is forcing you to go beyond the obvious. Because I mean, that's why the car example. Obviously, it's a bit of a noddy example, but it's very obvious when your car's not working. I mean, we've all done this. I mean, it doesn't happen as much these days as cars are better, but obviously we've all gone to our car and it doesn't start. And the first thing we know, the battery's flat. But what we never really think about is, well, why is the battery flat? And getting to that very deep sort of human understanding of, well, I can never be asked to arrange a service because it's basically costing me money and it only happens once a year.
I haven't got the time.
Yeah, exactly. So there are loads of factors that fit into that. But you know, I've actually worked on like a brand like Nurofen, and you know, people, like, a problem for Nurofen is people. This isn't breaching any confidentiality because this is something that they commercialise. But a problem with Nurofen had is people don't use Nurofen for headaches. Okay, but headaches are a massive pain problem. So, like at a very high level, that's what we were observing as a business. And we didn't really go through the 5 whys process, but we effectively did, because what we said is, well, why don't people use Nurofen? And the answer to that at the first level is they use paracetamol. So why do they use paracetamol instead of ibuprofen for headaches? And that's because actually they want to keep ibuprofen for when they really, really need it, and they don't want to just waste it for a headache. So why do they want to keep it for when they really, really need it? It's because it's an anti-inflammatory. So why do I think anti-inflammatories are only used when you really, really need it? It's because it's for joint pain. Okay, so we've worked out how consumers don't use Nurofen for a headache because they just think it's for joint pain because it's an anti-inflammatory, so they just use it for sore knees and bad backs. But actually, what we were able to do as a business was convert that into a message. So what we said, actually, a lot of headaches are caused by muscle pain and tension in your neck, and that is actually an anti-inflammatory problem. So by basically, we did a campaign which basically taught consumers to think about headache as a tension headache and muscular thing, and that basically improved our share of the market for headache. So you can see, you know, that's a personal example of a real business scenario that, you know, Nurofen have generated business from effectively adopting this approach. But what you really need to be doing is to getting past the very superficial answers why and getting to the deeper levels. And the theory is that you can do it in 5 whys. I'm not sure whether that's always true, but it probably is. You get a bit bored of asking why when by the time you got to 5 anyway. So you're probably deep enough at that point. But again, that's another good example of of why you need to understand your customer, why you need to understand your technology, why you need to understand the marketplace to come to those answers. So I'm sure in your business you'll be able to think of problems that you've probably addressed relatively superficially, but you could actually go further. Sorry, that was a long list.
Excellent.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
Okay.
Thanks, Rory. Okay, any other questions? Feel free to type a question out as well if you don't feel confident raising your hand. If you've got any questions or further comments, I'll just give you a couple of seconds just to jump in if anybody's got anything further.
Yeah, the other thing that I forgot to say on the innovation sprint is it's basically 5 steps. And you could actually enroll with Google and go down to London and do a course. And the way they would structure it is you do each step on each day. So you basically use the 5 days to do one of the steps. And that's a very time intensive process. But what's great about the process is you don't have to spend 5 days doing it. You could just do it in an afternoon. You could probably even just do it in a couple of hours or a lunchtime. I'm not saying you wouldn't have a more in-depth session if you did it over 5 days. Obviously you would. But what this tool does is it allows you to convert your understanding of your business in a download session into ideas that you've tested. And you could effectively apply 10 minutes to each of those steps and get somewhere. So in other words, it gives you the agility to do innovation whenever you like. Because basically, if you're in an organisation, you want to run an innovation session, and you're the unfortunate person who's been asked to organise that innovation session, it's often a very hard thing to do, because what do? You get 5 colleagues in the room and some post-it notes, and you basically get a load of post-it notes and do a session like that. There's nothing per se wrong with that, but having a more structured way of doing it and applying a little bit more rigor is a much better way of doing it. And that's what this tool allows you to do. And as I said, it's scalable. You can do it in a lunchtime, you can do it in an afternoon, you can do it every day, you can do it over 5 days. You could probably do it over 5 weeks if you had the luxury of time.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, Jamie, should we just skip on there? Okay, so we've got a quick poll just at the end of here, just to just skip on again, Jamie, please. We'd welcome you if you could just take part. I know we did a little one at the start. It's just a couple of questions at the end here, just to get a little bit further insight from you, and then we'll be able to tell you about some of the further opportunities and access to support that you can actually get. That's been delivered by the Business Growth Hub. So just on this first poll, if we could just set the first poll up, if we can just go through each of the questions. So how has COVID-19 affected you? We've probably got a pretty standard answer on this, but it'd be just interesting to see when it comes through. And if you've seen primarily positivity or opportunity in this, or if it's really just ultimately a really negative impact. It would be nice to get a reply to that. Jay, if you just next question. And then, yeah, just a little bit about from yourself, just describing yourself in terms of your relationship to technology and how you understand technology within your own business, or personally, how well you adapt to technology. Yeah, the question. Recognizing the impact that digital can have on your business, do you feel, not even just based on the webinar today, but just generally, have you thought about how, do you see it as a positive step? Do you think it's just not something that's your bag, or you don't really understand? It'd be good to understand that. Question 4. Prior to COVID, obviously COVID's been a big catalyst and it's the big talking point, but just out of curiosity, how much was technology or digital, how much was that a focus for your business before this pandemic came about? And 5, so question 5, post-COVID, how much, so based on the situation that we're in now, has your viewpoint changed, and would you be looking at digital solutions more? And finally, 6th question, key focuses for your business, moving forward, what are the key ambitions that you want to achieve? And now this may have changed and have been moved quite substantially based on the pandemic, so we're all forced, for example, to be remote working at the moment because of the lockdown. And you might find that you've had some struggles with that and thinking, okay, moving forward, we can navigate this more fluidly for future situations, but not just for, you know, pandemics or disruption, but actually just for generally working better or reducing cost margins or infrastructure costs or whatever that might be. So you might have found that this was really impact. So if, yeah, we'll just give you just a couple of seconds just to finish that up, and then we'll move on. Okay, Mark, did you want to speak about this last part in terms of further support?
Yes, please, Wayne. Yeah, that would be great, please.
Great.
Lovely. Thank you for that. So yeah, just very briefly then to finish up is just to share a little bit of information about the support that's available through the Digital Catalyst program. But just want to say thank you very much first to Jamie, Rob, and Wayne for the presentation, which you know was really interesting, very useful. We consider ourselves to be a reasonably innovative organisation, but some really invaluable tips and so on, techniques and so on that to give a try to. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Mark.
Very briefly then, if you mind just going to the next slide, please, Jamie. Smashing. Okay, so overview of what's available at the moment. So as for many of you, as I suspect, the COVID has had an impact on the delivery of the digital support that we're providing. And so currently there's three main areas. So the offer has been reshaped really to try and focus on areas that are most needed at the moment. So there's ICT webinars such as this one. We are in the process of setting up a schedule of these over the next couple of months. There's also grants available, which the Kingston upon Hull Council have made much more readily available and sped up the process to help with a number of areas. And then there's digital catalyst assistance. Jamie, would you mind moving one forward, please? Thank you. So briefly first, the ICT for Growth grants. So these are available for really almost any aspect of digital sort of adoption, really, whether it's buying hardware in the form of computers or servers, software to run different applications, or infrastructure such as moving to the cloud or using VPNs. The projects need to be total value between 2,500 and the very precise figure of 24,999, and basically that's because these are European funded grants. The grant percentage is 40%. So there's a very simple example there. If you spend 2,500 on, say, a couple of laptops or something else, then you'll be eligible for a grant of £1,000. So the money needs to be spent first, and some proof provided, not so as you would, I'm sure, would expect. But to say the process has been accelerated with the intention of payments being made within a fortnight of the application being received. So well worth a look, and it's been prioritised obviously to help deal with the current situation. The grant inquiry details are there, so we will share the slides afterwards. But if you do want to make a note, the telephone number for phone inquiries 01482 612 612. Nice easy one to remember. And the website is growmysme.co.uk/ICT. Just in terms of the digital catalyst support that are mentioned, very fortunate to have Jamie, Rob, and Wayne as part of our tech specialist team. So, as well as obviously all of the things that they've spoken about today, and other areas as well, we through the Digital Catalyst program, they would be available to support your businesses. So in this case, in any aspect of innovation linked of course to digital, but assessing your organisation but also supporting the development of solutions to opportunities and problems. So they can essentially take you through the sprint process that's been very well described today. But other typical projects we're seeing very much at the moment with move to remote working and obviously the associated opportunities and risks that bring. Firstly, moving operations to the cloud. Very much sort of looking at how to make it much more possible to work from different areas. Consolidating technology infrastructure. So quite often these infrastructures develop almost without sort of great deal of sort of strategy involved. Almost organically was the word I was looking for, but they develop and a number of different technologies are emerged, not always that compatible with one another, and don't always assist too much with productivity and running things to best effect. So opportunity to have that reviewed and to receive expert suggestions on other options. Then, of course, various tools and applications to increase productivity. Overall, the aim of Digital Catalyst, by the way, is to improve efficiency, to drive growth and to drive innovation within businesses. So, whilst these are specific projects to improve your operations, at the end, we're here to have impact, to help make a difference. Introducing e-commerce. So for many businesses, this is the norm, but of course there is still a big opportunity for e-commerce, and particularly looking at different ways of operating currently with the current restrictions faced as a result of the pandemic. There's opportunity to either raise the game with e-commerce, or if it's not something that's been deployed already, to look to start that. Cybersecurity becomes a bigger issue, particularly with for many organisations, their workforce working at home, or and all of the sort of associated sort of security issues around accessing data, folders, files, and so on. So again, we have expertise available to assist with that. Things like online accounting to improve efficiency, that can make a big difference to managing financials, and implementing CRMs. But these are just examples of the sorts of projects we can help with. They're available at no cost to yourselves. And what we'll also do is look to link, at least make suggestions of local organisations, technology providers that can assist with this, as well as being very aware of other grants and funding available and support available that can then, to then continue to move your business forward. Okay, just one more click. Okay, so in terms of really sort of looking very closely at the moment of overcoming those COVID-19, the COVID-19, or at least coping with it and dealing with it. Clearly, I think as Rob said, there's, whilst at the moment it's very much about keeping operations going, about survival for many organisations. There is the sort of recovery period to look forward to, or look ahead to, I should say. And so I think it is also about thinking, right, how do you get your business in a sort of strong position to emerge effectively from the crisis. We can help you to judge which technology options offer the greatest value for money, but also which ones will work best for you, not just now, but also as you move forward. There's of course, with any technology changes, there can be knock-on effects in terms of your existing infrastructure and what you're doing. An example there about cloud computing could mean different security and working practices, which we've already alluded to. And also it's a little bit of a certain amount of pragmatism as well. If your current infrastructure is working reasonably well, then it may be that you don't want to rip the whole thing up and start again. Actually, it's a case of thinking, right, how can we make it work more efficiently, and what can we add to it to supplement and make things work better. Yeah, and then of course it's the hand holding element. So it's beyond actually, you know, as I say, mentioned about, you know, this is more than just giving advice. It's a little bit of a rolling sleeves up and actually helping you to make it happen as well, which is often the tough thing is getting started with technology change, of course. Okay, so 3 very brief reasons we think you'll gain value from this. One, yeah, you know, you've heard from the 3 guys today. They are experts in this field, and they can literally sort of fast track your learning and help you overcome some of the sort of pain that and trial and error. They can really help you to get to the right answer much faster. You know, as I say, our aim is very much about making a positive difference, but a sustainable product, positive difference, but also in a way that, you know, that is enjoyable. The people that we've engaged with, you know, they'll challenge, but they'll do things in a fun way, but hopefully one that will, you know, make you think differently and inject that element of sort of energy and momentum, if you like, into your activities. And then finally, just yeah, those are the things we've spoken about already. So yeah, Rob presented about the agile rather than waterfall process, the benefits of that sort of approach and mentality, and various other points, there which you can read. Please do contact us. We will intend to follow up with yourselves, but they are the numbers to find out more, or the numbers to find out more: 01482 686 700. We've got an email address there, digitalcatalyst@winningmoves.com, and the web address is again growmysme.co.uk/ict/digital-catalyst. So please do yeah, be in touch. But as I say, we will also follow up with yourselves to see if you. What assistance you may need and how we can potentially help. Okay.
Great.
So
Thanks, Mark.
Yep. Great stuff. Yeah, it was just to finish from my perspective before handing back over, is just say again, big thanks to you guys, and of course a big thanks to those of you that are, you know, to particularly Rob, who is still with us, for attending. Really appreciate the investment in time you've made. Wayne, back to you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much. Folks, thanks for tuning in. I hope this has been helpful. As you can see, we've given you some links and phone numbers there, so you can follow up and find out more. There is actually loads of support out there at the moment, which is all free to yourselves. And the whole point, it really is helping to grow your business, helping you to adopt new digital technologies or solutions to increase either productivity or new revenue margins or new capabilities, and it's all there for you to be able to access. So please do get involved and try it out, and look out for the other webinars. As Mark says, there's going to be a whole link of webinars going out, so keep checking out, because they will be promoted, and it'll be on a whole range of different subjects, which is going to be quite relevant to any business or organization. But I think that's it from us. Thanks very much for tuning in, everybody.